Good morning and welcome to our February Law and Regulatory Committee meeting. I'd like to call the meeting to order and ask our clerk to call the roll.
Thank you. We'll start off with Vice Mayor Bernasconi.
Here.
And Councilor Mendoza.
Here.
Thank you.
At this time, I'd like to request Sarah to lead us in the pledge, please.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. At this time, I'll open it up for public comment. Again, this is public comment on items that are not listed on today's agenda. Seeing none, I will close public comment, and we'll move on to item 5, which is our reports. I'll turn it over. What's going on with my mic today? I'll turn it over to Mark Walensky, our Deputy City Manager. Mark Walensky and Rob Becerra for their update.
Good morning, Chairman Mendoza and Vice Mayor Bernasconi. Once again, Mark Walensky, Government Relations Administrator, and the following report includes an overview and an assortment of two-year bills with areas of particular focus on public safety and newly introduced bills related to homelessness, housing, public works, and at the federal level, the appropriations process. Joining me for the presentation is Rob Becerra, Program Manager. As you know, this is the second year of the legislative session, legislature's two-year session. As such, all bills that aren't passed by the legislature this year become failed bills. The bill introduction period ended this year on Friday, February 16th. At this time, I'll turn the presentation over to Rob to discuss public safety and building legislation.
Thank you, Mark. I'm going to present 4 pieces of legislation that you have seen before, 3 that we have previously supported based on the direction of council, and 2 that we have in a watch position, again, just to determine its ultimate impacts. Very interesting to see what has come thus far in the 2-year cycle, and as you heard yesterday, the government relations team analyzes over 2,000 bills that are out there currently. Related specifically to fire and a nexus to police as well, AB 512, a Waldron bill, mental health and substance abuse disorders database for facilities. This is a bill we had previously supported, would recommend support again, and it creates a real-time database that first responders would be able to access to see where beds are available for mental health resources. So not just locally here in Roseville and Placer County, but around the region. If somebody was in need of mental health assistance, this database would allow first responders to be able to get someone the care they needed. Seems reasonable, seems that it would support our first responders, so we would again recommend a support position on this bill. Specifically to law enforcement, SB 402, involuntary commitment. We're all aware, again, with the mental health crisis and issues that are out there in society. This bill specifically links to, it's something called the Lanterman-Petrus Short Act. We all recognize it as a 5150 hold if someone is going to be a harm to themselves or others. And this bill actually directly would support the police department because it creates an avenue where our social services practitioners would be able to play a more critical role in providing 5150 holds. Currently, our process is if someone from our social services team, a licensed clinical social worker, determines someone might be a harm to themselves or others, they have to bring an officer in, and the officer then has to be that authority. So we see this as something that would be very beneficial to our social services team and across the state as we see the growth of the mental health crisis teams, the co-responder teams with law enforcement and social services practitioners. So we would again recommend support on this position, or excuse me, on this bill. AB 1772, easily called theft. We're highlighting this piece of legislation because we believe now more than ever we are going to see adjustments made to Prop 47. Prop 47 was a piece of legislation passed years ago under the Safe Neighborhoods and Schools Act. And it did several things, but one specifically that AB 1772 targets is that 950 threshold. Although the reason that we have 1772 as a watch, because there are several bills out in regards to adjustments for Prop 47. This one specifically, ultimately, we're not sure if this will gain traction, but again, just signals pieces that are trying to be adjusted from Prop 47. Likely, and hopefully, we will see some adjustments from Prop 47. If it's the 950 threshold now can be across multiple stores. That's one of the significant changes where it's not just 950 from one store. So if it's theft of a similar product from multiple stores, that could be combined. And the last one I'll discuss is related to the building department, AB 704, energy, building standards, photovoltaic requirements. We currently have an opposed position on this piece of legislation because within this bill, it creates really an exemption for the building code standards of today. If a disaster, a wildfire, a flood were to, say, decimate a property, this bill is seeking to make it that that house can be rebuilt with the code standards of whenever that structure was built. Our building department has significant concerns over this. As an example, if we had a catastrophic flood in Roseville and we had 10 homes that were destroyed, then each of those houses potentially could have different building requirements as they are rebuilt. But if it was built back in the 70s, that would be the standard that would apply. It would create significant challenges for our building officials and our building inspectors to be able to establish if that house was rebuilt properly. Those are the four pieces I have today. Mark, I'll pass it back to you.
Thanks, Rob. In the bills that I'll be covering are all newly introduced bills. And the first three bills relate to homelessness. Assembly Bill 1813. This new law is being proposed to help senior citizens who are at risk of becoming homeless. The law would create a program to give monies to cities and counties so they can help seniors with rental assistance. The amount of money a senior would be able to receive for rent each month would be limited to $500 for 18 months. The city is supporting the bill for the benefits it would provide to help seniors who are in danger of becoming homeless due to challenges related to making monthly rent payments. The potential benefits of a program that prevents a person or persons from becoming homeless could be very beneficial to the city's efforts in helping people remain housed. Assembly Bill 1782. As you know, state law dissolved redevelopment agencies and community development agencies in 2012 and replaced them with successor agencies. These agencies were required to pay any existing debt and maintain low and moderate income housing funds from money generated by the housing assets. This bill would increase the amount allowed to be spent on homeless prevention and rapid rehousing services from $250,000 to $500,000 each fiscal year. The city is supporting this bill for the opportunities and resources it could provide to the city's efforts to address homelessness. The bill would also let two or more housing successors in the same county agree to transfer up to $1 million each to help develop specific projects like transit priority projects and regional homeless shelters. This money can also be used to help pay for rental units affordable to those earning 60% or less of the area median income, as well as 10% of the units in a regional homeless shelter affordable to those earning 80% or less of the area median income. And as you may recall, the city did have a redevelopment agency and has a successor agency as well. And then the final homeless bill is Assembly Bill 1818. And this bill would require all three main types of public colleges in California to allow students who are homeless or who have been homeless in the past to park and sleep in their vehicles on campus, as long as they have a parking permit and park in approved areas. The bill would also prohibit the colleges from punishing these students for living in their vehicle. The city has a watch position on this bill to understand any concerns that colleges may have with the proposed bill. Furthermore, the city will want to understand how the colleges would implement the requirements if the bill was signed into law. Just as a side note, during the recent point-in-time count of homeless, there was an uptick in the number of people that were surveyed and interviewed that were living in their cars. So I thought this bill was particularly noteworthy. With respect to housing, public works, and I have an intent bill that I'm going to discuss briefly. Assembly Bill 1893. The city has a watch position on this bill to understand what opportunities the bill would provide for local governments if enacted. The bill would allow a city to make certain changes if a city already has a plan that follows the housing element law and the proposed housing project does not fit with the city's existing zoning or land use plans. Assembly Bill 1932. Currently, there is a plan in place called the California Statewide Housing Plan. The plan is developed with the help of private housing companies, regional and local housing and planning agencies, and other state agencies. This bill would require the plan to incorporate those efforts in consultation with the Interagency Council on Homelessness, excuse me, and use data from the, excuse me, Homelessness Data Integration System to ensure that housing assistance policy goals and objectives that are specifically, to ensure that housing assistance policy goals and objectives that specifically impact people experiencing homelessness are thoroughly reviewed and considered. And the city also has a watch position on the bill to understand the entire implications it may have on the city's efforts to address homelessness. And Public Works, a Public Works bill is Senate Bill 955. The existing law creates the Office of Planning and Research within the governor's office to help the governor and governor's cabinet with long-term planning and research. This office also serves as the main state planning agency. This bill would create the Infrastructure Gap Funding Program within the Office of Planning and Research to provide grants to local agencies to help them develop and build infrastructure projects. The city has a watch position on this bill to understand the specifics of the legislation and the benefits that ultimately could be realized for the city's use if the bill was enacted. And then the last bill is Assembly Bill 1987. And this bill simply describes a current law that outlines rules and authorizations for the creation of cities, counties, and other local agencies. The bill being discussed is meant to clarify those rules and provide further legislation regarding local government. I wanted to bring this to the committee's attention because this is an intent bill, and we have a watch position on the bill to understand what eventual implications this might have on the city, but wanted to point out that intent bills are a regular occurrence during bill introductions, and they require the government relations staff to remain vigilant on changes to the bills as they ultimately may result in a bill that could have consequences to the city. And then finally, at the federal level, appropriations. On March 1st and March 8th, the appropriations process for fiscal 2024 will expire. There are still dozens of policy disputes separating the parties that congressional leaders have not yet begun to seriously discuss. Appropriators expect Speaker Johnson, Senate Majority Leader Schumer, House Minority Leader Jeffries, and Senate Minority Leader McConnell to negotiate contested policy riders after appropriators work out programmatic funding levels in their bills. The 12 appropriation subcommittees are negotiating those funding levels now, but are not currently discussing policy riders. This is seen as a problem for completing the bills because House Republicans thus far have been insistent that items considered to be critical, important to conservative agenda be included in the final legislation. Of the appropriations processes options remaining for Congress, one of the most consequential would be if Congress passes a continuing resolution, or a CR, through September 30th. This action would cut non-defense budgets by a total of $73 billion from current levels. Separately, lawmakers are facing another potential sequester scenario thanks to a provision contained in the debt limit package passed last year. If the government is operating under any short-term CR come April 30th, there will be a $10 billion cut to the military's budget and a $41 billion cut to domestic programs. This could have significant implications for different programs and services and funding resources that the city relies upon, such as housing and urban development and transportation funding. So in conclusion, government relations staff is now fully engaged in reading the more than 2,000 bills that have been introduced by the legislature. Additionally, we remain very engaged in the appropriations process to advocate for appropriate funding levels for the various programs and services that are important to the city. This concludes our presentation, and we're prepared to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Rob. Vice Mayor Bernasconi, any questions?
Yes, a few questions. AB 512, the first one that we heard that was under fire, the one for the mental health database. Why is that under fire? Not under fire, but why is that categorized under the fire?
It could be coupled both police or fire, because it is also possible for firefighters, if they're on a medical aid call that doesn't turn to a police call, they could also be the ones seeking mental health assistance for someone.
Okay.
And I'll also add, Chief Bartee has a particular interest in this and has been before Congress and had meetings with members of Congress on the mental health issue as well. So he's really at the forefront of it and has been engaged in Washington on mental health as well. So it's part of the reason that we've tagged it under fire as well.
Oh, good. Okay, that's good to know. Let's see. AB 704, with our newly elected assembly member opposing something that he put forward. Is that the right Patterson? 704?
Actually, I don't believe it is our Patterson.
No,
Okay.
it's not a.
Good. All right. And I read that to be that it's only residential standards. It doesn't cover commercial, right? So if something happened in our historic area, that's not included in this. Okay.
Correct.
And could I also offer
Yes.
too is, last year there was a bill that that Assemblymember Patterson, although it wasn't one of his bills, it was a bill that the city took an opposed position on. And we had lengthy conversations with the Assemblymember over it because he had a differing opinion on that piece of legislation. And, we were able to come to an agreement and an understanding that, part of the political process is that there are going to be times when we're going to be have different opinions on a piece of legislation, but that's a natural part of the process. And so, having that conversation with him, I was actually rather pleased that it happened because it allowed us to have that conversation with him and come to that understanding. So it was beneficial.
That's why you do what you do. Good job. Okay. Yeah, I just had a couple other questions. Let me see what. The AB under homelessness, the AB 13 and 782 are both to create funding sources from the state. And maybe this is just a rhetorical question, but the only funding that the state has really is taxpayer. So are each of these, from your understanding, going to be new new funding sources? Are they rolling over from somewhere else, do you know?
1813 would definitely be that. 1782 would be something that would come from, it would change the regulations, the regulations for how a successor agency can spend their money. And so that would be funding that the successor agency has, so it wouldn't be new money that would be required from the state. 1813 would be new money, and so to your point exactly, and knowing that the state has the budget challenges that it has, new funding coming from the state is going to, bills that are requiring that are going to find it challenging to be passed.
Got it, okay. Just, thinking about our city and our ability to, live within our means and, these new programs that get passed down, but there are no funding sources that are attached to it. Okay. I just have, I think, two more questions. AB 1818, that's regarding the college students and their ability to be able to park on campus with parking permit. Would that apply to anywhere in Roseville, for example, like a satellite campus of a college?
I'm not sure. I didn't read in the bill if it. I don't recall off the top of my head if it determines if it's main campuses and satellite campuses. I'll research the bill and get back to you with that with clarification, and whether or not the bill calls that out.
Got it, okay. And the 1893, the housing projects that cities would not have the ability to really stop them, I mean, is that any different than by right? I mean, is that just another way of saying by right ability to develop a project?
It's more the way that that we're reading the bill is that it once again gives the city some new flexibilities that it currently doesn't have with respect to the housing element and its interaction with the Department of Housing and Community Development. And so the interest is if it does give us that, give local governments an ability that we currently don't have.
Okay, that's good. And I think this is my last question, and we talked about this last night, but on the federal side, the appropriations and the deadline for it, and we talked about the three different options, and I think the deadline is March 8th. Is that
So
right?
there's one deadline is March 1st, so there are three appropriations bills that are part of the March 1st deadline, and transportation and housing and urban development is one of the three bills for March 1st. The remaining 9 bills are, the deadline is March 8th.
Got it, okay. So how firm is that deadline? I mean, are they able to extend it for a period of time, and how soon will we know what happened?
So they could negotiate, and this is the challenge with the appropriations process, because as we know, this started last year, right? And so it's they've always kind of continued to move the milestone dates out. They could negotiate another short-term resolution to give them more time to meet this, but haven't heard that there's that interest in doing that. It would be more that they would explore the other options, the long-term continuing resolution, or there are some other options that they have, which are called minibuses, which are smaller funding packages, and so they would fund certain departments and agencies. But it would, if they go that direction, much like the continuing resolution direction, it has specific limitations that the funding, to what funding levels they could build those, like a minibus to, or a continuing resolution to.
Got it.
And as the federal lobbyist mentioned at last night's meeting, if they do a year-long continuing resolution, any earmarks that are in any of the appropriations bills would be eliminated. And then there would be further reductions to the different programs, the funding levels for the different programs and services. And so,
Essentially, that date could come and go
yes.
with
and-
a couple different caveats.
Yes. And then one of the other options is if those dates come and go and they don't choose one of those other options, then that obviously then reverts to a government shutdown, right? And so we could find ourselves in that place as well. One of the disappointing things that's happening right now is, and once again, as the federal lobbyist mentioned last night, for the Transportation, Housing, and Urban Development Bill that the House and the Senate appropriators have agreed to, we still don't know what that top-line funding level is. They're not releasing that funding level. So we don't know if it's to the 2022 budget year, or if it's to the 2023 budget year, or something in between. And until they release that number, and they've been very tight-lipped about it. There has been no leak of what that number is. And so we really don't have a sense of, until they release that, of what programs and services are being funded and to what level. And we won't know that maybe until March 1st, maybe a day or two in advance of that. But the House doesn't come back into session until next week. And so I would anticipate that there would be a little bit more movement and activity and information forthcoming next week because the House will be back in session.
All right. Thank you both.
Just a couple questions. Rob, I may have missed it. I just want to clarify on AB 1772, we're taking the watch position because of the threshold of the change. They could be a 950 over multiple stores. Is that what we're doing the watch, or what was the reasoning? I was taking notes and I missed the last part of your.
So my stance on it is, and certainly open to feedback, is there are a number of bills out targeting Proposition 47, and I think at this point, from the team's perspective, it's too early to tell which ones are going to gain traction and which ones aren't. Now, because we agree with the spirit of this, we can always move to a support position, but then focus our advocacy efforts on what we hope are some of those winners. Specifically to this, though, I'll say there's two components that 1772 does. So if you have 2 or more prior convictions, it makes you eligible for jail time, 1 to 3 years. And it also couples the 950 across multiple stores of one time. So that's the two significant pieces that this piece of legislation does. Certainly both things that we have previously supported in spirit. So very open to making adjustments.
No, that helps. That's the part I missed. And the 950 doesn't have to be all in one day. That could be over a course of 2 or 3 days, as long as it's documented.
And that's the piece, you have to get down into the details of the legislation, because they did put parameters around and a kind of one occurrence of theft. So it could be multiple stores, but is it possible if you show up to someone's house and they have a garage full of Infomeal and they didn't just steal it from one store, if you can make a case through the investigative process to be able to say, here's where this batch came from store A, this batch came from store B, then to be able to couple that. So it does get very nuanced on how to couple it, but it's not quite as easy as we know you stole over multiple days, and now we're going to couple that.
Got it. Thank you. And then on AB 1818, Vice Mayor Bernasconi touched on it a little bit, but I have a couple questions on this. So, for instance, Sierra College in Rockland, which obviously isn't our jurisdiction, but that is a main campus, and the campus police would have jurisdiction there. If things got to a point where they needed assistance, obviously, Rockland PD, but let's say that was in Roseville, then Roseville PD would also be charged to help them with that. But if we were to get another college, and there's discussions of that within our city, I guess my concern is how will you know that this person doesn't have his whole family? You know, how are we preventing RVs and, larger, vehicles just because they have a parking pass? And for most of these colleges, with Sierra College across the street being one of them, you can enroll in a certification program, and just have one class, maybe a week, which doesn't really, you don't have to have 9 or 12 units or whatever. So I guess I have a concern of what that's going to do when they leave campus. They have to get gas, they have to eat, they have to do other things. I mean,
And what, so I can take that question, Councilmember Mendoza. We're watching it to understand what objections and what concerns the colleges will have, because really this is something that is a primary focus for them. And I would anticipate that law enforcement will want to weigh in. Ultimately, that this will end up being on the public safety's list of bills, because I'm sure that they'll have concerns as well, and some of the concerns that you've mentioned. And I know that because it calls for being able to, that a vehicle would have to have a parking pass from that institution, that whatever requirements that they have to get that parking pass, and I don't know if they have RVs are allowed, as part of student parking or not. And so we're watching it very closely to understand the nuanced elements of it.
Right.
And
let me refine my question a little more. So specifically with Sierra College right across the street here, so they do issue parking passes.
Okay.
But also, students are allowed to park in our garages, if there's not room for them with a parking pass. And Sierra College, with the agreement with the 316, because we have city offices in there, there is limited parking that they offer their students, and then they're referred to the garages. So with this particular bill, with that language in mind, being that they're an active student enrolled in one class or 5 classes, doesn't matter, they have a parking pass, which would allow them to park either in the designated spots or in one of our garages. My concern is these individuals camping overnight and sleeping in our city garages, which the city doesn't extend that ability to the colleges for them to sleep on public property. So how do we distinguish that?
Okay, and great point. And what we can do is make note of that and bring that forward as concern of the bill.
Okay.
And we can, certainly make our legislators aware of that concern. We can make the others who might be taking a position on the bill, make them aware of our concern. And we can also let the author know our concerns through our state lobbyist.
I mean, I know other cities might not have the unique situation that we have, of being that
Yes.
our garages are attached to that. It creates a unique opportunity for us to maybe be a little more vocal in if we choose to oppose it or choose to, support it, carve out that caveat about the city property, because I don't want to start that, because that would lead to other problems that we don't want to deal with.
Yeah, great point.
Yeah.
And what I can add to that is previous iterations of this bill, and again, not this specific language, as Mark has mentioned, we can take a deeper dive in. Previous iterations of this bill only apply to college campuses, not satellite campuses, so only college campuses. And the challenges that were faced from this bill previously did come from your exact train of thought, was who's ultimately accountable for the safety of the individuals who are sleeping in this designated area. Is that campus police, or is that the local city police? And I think that was likely the primary issue why this bill did not previously pass. Certainly something that we'll put on public safety's radar as well.
Thank you both for your insight. Okay, at this time, we'll open it up for public comment. Seeing none, I will close public comment. Thank you, gentlemen. We will move on to item 5.2, And I'll welcome up our Utility Government Relations Administrator, Amber Blix, who will give us an update on our electric department legislation.
Good morning, Chairman Donza and Vice Mayor Bernasconi. I'm going to start our legislative and regulatory overview with a couple items that we wanted to touch upon today. The first is an advocacy issue, which will go over a Capital Day recap. The second is our grant that we just applied for at the California Energy Commission on the DEBA program, or the Distributed Electricity Backup Assets Program. Next, we'll talk about the low carbon fuel standard regulation, one bill that was introduced in the legislature regarding linear generators, and then a federal issue on the Supply Chain Reliability Act. So first up is a overview of our Capital Day activities. Every year, the California Municipal Utilities Association and the Northern California Power Agency host an annual Legislative Advocacy Day, or Capital Day, where publicly owned utilities in the water and energy fields collectively come together for a one-day event to meet with our representatives in the state legislature. And this is an opportunity for our legislatures to hear from us and our city council members on the city's water and power priority issues for the year. And the electric department and the environmental utilities department work collaboratively to put together papers and issue briefs that will provide for our legislators. This is a great event to get to meet with our legislatures at the forefront of a new year. And this year, the electric department focused our talking points on our support for reliability-related programs, a continued focus on affordability, the need for flexibility and collaboration to meet the state's goals, and the transformation of our Utility Exploration Center, which is currently underway. And this opportunity really gives us this event really gives us the opportunity to proactively support our issues for the year. This year, we were joined by Councilmember Rakucci, who was able to attend these events with us. And just a couple of items that I'll share of note from Capital Day. We do have representation on the Energy Committee in the Assembly this year with Assemblymember Patterson on that committee. That's the first time, I believe, that we've had representation on that committee since I've been here over 5 years, so that's very exciting. And then secondly, I think we have a lot of opportunities for collaboration going forward as we continue to implement a lot of the electricity goals that the state's facing. So very good day and great opportunity to meet with our legislative folks. The next item that I wanted to discuss is our grant funding opportunity, the Distributed Electricity Backup Assets Program. And this is a little bit of a recap that we discussed last night, but on December 6th, the Roseville City Council approved Roseville Electric's ability to apply for a grant funding opportunity as part of the California Energy Commission's Distributed Electricity Backup Assets Program, or DEBA. The DEBA program is seeking efficiency upgrades and capacity additions to existing bulk grid power generators in California to support the state's electric grid during extreme events. As part of the DEBA grant funding opportunity, Roseville is proposing upgrades to be made at the units that are currently owned by the Department of Water Resources, but that are operated by and located in Roseville. These units are operated by or called on by the California ISO when needed for extreme events. If accepted into the DEBA program, Roseville would begin executing agreements to upgrade certain equipment on the generating units, and Roseville would commit to schedule these units during defined grid energy emergencies for a 5-year term and receive up to $1.5 million in grant funding to support the equipment upgrades. Contractually, it's anticipated that Roseville would take ownership of both of those generating units by the end of 2024, if approved in the DEBA program. Otherwise, the path to ownership for these units will be in the 2026 to 2027 timeframe. So the grant funding opportunity, or the GFO, as we like to call it, was released in December of 2023 with a February 20th submittal deadline. Electric department staff worked collaboratively over that time period and put together an on-time submittal late last week. This was a very collaborative effort to get this grant submitted in a short time frame. So we're looking forward to hopefully a hopeful outcome, and accepted applicants are expected to be announced in mid-March. The next item is the Low Carbon Fuel Standard Program. The purpose of the Low Carbon Fuel Standard Program, or the LCFS, is to reduce the carbon intensity of transportation fuels used in California, to incentivize the production of low carbon and renewable alternatives, and to increase energy security in the transportation sector. Utilities are required to use the LCFS credit proceeds to benefit current or future electric vehicle customers. And the California Air Resources Board recently proposed amendments to the LCFS program. The main purpose of the amendments is to decarbonize fuels more aggressively and further incentivize the production of clean fuels by increasing both the pre- and post-2030 stringency of the LCFS carbon intensity benchmarks. Right now, we're unaware of any concerns with the proposed amendments that apply to our LCFS credits and proceeds. However, under the LCFS regulation and rulemaking, the definition of low income can be established by the publicly owned utilities governing body. So in order to ensure maximum benefits to our community, staff is considering proposing a definition of low income that would be specific to the LCFS spending requirement that will allow for a wider reach and greater impact within Roseville's low-income areas and customers. Roseville collaborated with our trade associations to provide comments to the California Air Resources Board, which were due on February 20th. And I bring up the definition of the low income here specifically because that would be an item that would come to council at some later date. So I just wanted to flag that for you in case you see that in the future. There's not a predetermined time of when that may come, but it's just something that we'll be looking at to further the benefits to our community under that program. In terms of state legislation, we have AB 1921, which we have a watch position on. And this bill would allow linear generators that use renewable fuels to be counted as eligible under the RPS program, or the Renewable Portfolio Standard. These resources essentially convert linear motion of the oscillators directly into electricity. Historically, it's been very challenging to amend the RPS program, but there is a lot of conversation going around right now about hydrogen being eligible in the RPS context as well. So this is a bill that we're kind of watching, and it's also a new technology, so we're kind of in the process of finding out more about this technology now. And then finally, on the federal legislation, Senate Bill 3626 was recently introduced, and this deals with Distribution Transformer Efficiency and Supply Chain Reliability Act of 2024. And it's in response to a 2023 rulemaking by the Department of Energy on new transformer efficiency standards. This legislation places limits on efficiency standard changes and provides an implementation delay, and it allows manufacturers adequate time to address changes in production. So we've been supportive of this concept in the past to help ease transformer supply constraint concerns. This bill was just recently introduced for this committee hearing. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Great. Thank you, Amber. Vice Mayor Bernasconi.
I don't have any questions, but excellent job, and I'm glad that you were all present for the Capitol Day advocacy event.
I don't have any questions either. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. At this time, we'll open it up for public comments. Seeing none, we'll close public comment, and we'll move on to item 5.3 this morning, which is our environmental utilities priority legislation updates, and I'll hand it over to Noelle Maddock.
Good morning, Chairman
Morning.
Donza and Vice Mayor Bernasconi. For our report this morning, I will be covering state legislation that has been introduced in January of 2024. When we were here last, I talked about the 2-year bills. I think we've heard there's over 2,200 bills that have been introduced so far. Just in the last day, there was about 1,700 or more bills introduced. So staff is still working through those bills, and we will be bringing those to you. We've gotten a preview from some of our associations, so that it looks like it's going to be a very lively year again this year. But the first bill I'm going to cover this morning is AB 1798 by Assemblywoman Pappen, dealing with stormwater. AB 1798 proposes to create the Saving Aquatic Life from Manufactured Oxidized Nanochemicals Act, also being referred to as the Salmon Act. I kind of like this one a little bit better than the PFAS, to be honest. What this bill would do would require the Department of Transportation, in consultation with the State Water Resources Control Board, the Department of Toxic Substance Control, and the Department of Fish and Wildlife to require an environmental review process to prevent 6-PPD and 6-PPD quinine or quinone, which is a chemical that is commonly found in vehicle tires, from entering into salmon and steelhead trout bearing surfaces. Additionally, the environmental review process is to include a pilot project to examine the effectiveness and cost-effectiveness of installing facilities to maintain and treat stormwater pollutant discharges. A little background, currently Roseville has a stormwater management program in place that educates our community members on the harmful pollutants that often find their ways into our creeks and streams from stormwater runoff. And in 2022, the city adopted the West Placer Stormwater Quality Design Manual, which aids in the design of stormwater management for new and redeveloped projects within the city. So this means that the city is already taking efforts to reduce stormwater pollutants getting into our creeks and waterways. And further, the Department of Toxic Substances Control adopted a rule back in 2023 that requires tire manufacturers to evaluate safer alternatives to the 6-PPD chemicals, potentially making this bill unnecessary. But staff are coordinating our efforts with Government Relations Administrator Mark Walensky, and we will continue to monitor this legislation. The next bill was also introduced by Assemblywoman Pappen, and that is AB 1827, which deals with water rate setting. AB 1827 was introduced to deal with a recent ruling in the trial court case, Patz versus the City of San Diego. In Patz, the court invalidated the City of San Diego's tiered water rates calculated using peak factors and ruled that the city failed to demonstrate by substantial evidence that the tiered water rates imposed by its rate makings are proportional to the cost of service attributable to each customer's parcel as required by Proposition 218. Specifically, AB 827 would allow local water agencies, when imposing or increasing fees or charges for property-related water service pursuant to Prop 218, to include the incrementally higher costs of water service due to any of the following: higher water use demand of parcels, the maximum potential water use of parcels, and projected peak water usage. Or any combination of those three. The costs associated with higher water usage demands, the maximum potential water use, or a projected peak water usage demand could be allocated using any method that reasonably assesses the water service provider's costs of serving those parcels. In addition to any other method consistent with Proposition 218. The costs may be allocated based on meter size or peaking factors. This bill is actually, I always get to say this word wrong, declaratory of existing law, and would apply retrospectively and prospectively. And the Patz case is now heading into the appellate court. So staff will continue to watch this measure as it moves through, as well as we'll be watching the outcome of that case as well. The next bill is AB 1851 by Assemblymember Holden, which deals with lead testing in schools. This bill is very similar to AB 249 from last year, which sought to require community water systems to test for lead in potable water system outlets at school sites. Governor Newsom ultimately vetoed AB 249 due to the cost concerns for school districts as well as public water agencies. However, AB 1851 would establish a pilot program that requires the superintendent of public instruction to contract with a nonprofit technical assistance organization to do the following: sample all potable water system outlets for lead contamination at school sites that were built prior to January 1st of 2010, and where all outlets on a campus have not been tested on or after January 1st of 2019. Second, they would be required to remediate any potable water system outlets emitting lead contamination in excess of 5 parts per billion. And then the nonprofit technical organization would be required by January 1st of 2028 to submit an analysis of the remediation methods used and provide recommendations to the State Department of Public Health. Staff believes that this approach is much better than what was proposed by the same author last year. So staff will continue to monitor this legislation, and we're interested to see how they're going to address the funding issue, because that is not contained in the bill at this time. And then the last measure I will cover this morning is AB 1857, which deals with air quality regulations for stationary sources. And AB 1857 would require California Air Resources Board to adopt regulations to improve air quality in population centers located in valleys from stationary sources. Each air district would be required to implement the regulations until January 1st of 2029, when they would be repealed. And the Air Board would then be required to submit a report to the legislature by January 1st of 2030, summarizing the regulations, describing any air quality improvements obtained as a result of those regulations. Just one of the things that we're looking at is how they're defining valley, and it currently is defining it as an elongated depression of the Earth's surface, usually between two ranges of hills or mountains. Depending on how this gets interpreted, it could be rather expansive. So EU staff is watching this measure, and for potential implications to our wastewater, and there are potentially other city facilities that may be affected as well. So we will be coordinating with, I think electric would be my first call on that one. So, and that concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Awesome. Thank you, Noel. Vice Mayor Bernasconi?
Yes, one question, Chairman Donza, and for Noel. AB 1851, the lead testing, and
Yes.
that's been introduced.
Yes.
You said before, and has failed, and I know that our local schools voluntarily submit to lead testing. Is this your only knowledge of schools being targeted? Are there other water sources tested, like in other public spaces or even private spaces? For and they have the same 5 parts per billion.
So the changing to the 5 parts per billion, that is a recent change. And so it's typically aimed at daycares and schools, because the lead introduction in children, that's where the focus is. And so the legislature has been focusing their time and attention to daycares and schools. And through, don't remember the exact dates, but water systems have had their water permits amended to require us to test in daycare facilities as well as schools, develop testing plans and all that, and work collaboratively with the schools and daycares to get those tests done. So it's duplicative of some of the efforts that California specifically has already done, but they're taking it to the next level. When we reported to the schools and the daycares, we did report the lead levels, if there were any, to those facilities as well.
Okay, I guess my question is schools and and child care. I mean, that's just one spoke in the wheel. You know, you think about restaurants and homes and parks, and is there legislation to test those as well, or are these schools and daycare facilities the only ones that are being targeted at this point?
At this time, it's focused solely on the daycare facilities and the schools because kids are spending so much time in those facilities.
Okay, thank you.
I don't have any questions. Thank you, Noel.
Thank you.
All right, at this time, I'll open it up to public comment. I was wondering when you were going to come up here.
No, Council, it's like a dream. Am I dreaming? I don't understand where to even begin. Schools, daycare and schools. What's a school? Is that a private school? Is that a public school? Is that a chartered school? Is that a elementary school?
Yes.
Is that a college? Is that a technical center? I don't know. Are these bills, these are state bills? So this discussion occurs in every city council in every city. I hear things today, and this is off the current topic, but
So we can't.
Okay.
We can take your suggestions, but we can't answer them right now. But we can't speak to what other cities are doing either. But you can speak whatever you want, but they're probably not going to be able to answer your questions. But we can follow up with you for sure.
Thank you. Environmental utilities. The McKinley Water District. In 2023, it was on the ballot. I understand there were no individuals that submitted for election on the board of the McKinley Water District. And yet I now see that the Elections Department has nominated individuals for that board. I don't know where those names come from, who raises their hand for that. And I even questioned the McKinley Water District. I mean, it's in Folsom. Does the city of Roseville secure water from that? I don't know. I heard things about the building department. I always understood building codes are for protection of safety and life. To rebuild based on codes years past, that exposes harm to humans. You know, you have a collapse of a roof structure due to weight of ice and snow. The house comes down. Building code requires, load-bearing framing, more the thickness of the roof decking to be higher to maintain that snow load that may come in the future. But yet we're going to have the rebuilding go backwards. Kind of weird. Don't understand. You could apply it to a fire license. No, Roseville, our major exposure, I would think, not so much snow, not so much fire, but maybe flood. So if you're in a pre-firm home and it floods, you're required to build to post-firm, above the flood level. But if these new builds are coming that say you go backwards, so you're below floodplain, oh yeah, you rebuild below floodplain. That makes a lot of sense. How we can suggest a decrease in military funding?
For you?
Am I dreaming?
No.
Okay.
Thank you for your comments. Any other public comment? Seeing none, I will close public comment. Mark, any closing comments?
None other than to say that the next L&R committee meeting is on Thursday, March 28th.
Wonderful. We will stand adjourned until March 28th. Thank you, everyone.